new technologies do not only change your life, but they also change the world and the international order that we're living in.
Welcome to the Global Network for Science and Diplomacy podcast. I'm your host, and today I'm delighted to welcome Martin Rauchbauer, senior diplomat, former Austrian Tech Ambassador in Silicon Valley, and co-founder of the Tech Diplomacy Network. Martin, it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Such a pleasure being here.
You've been described as one of the pioneers of tech diplomacy. If we take a step back beyond the term itself, how would you define what is fundamentally changing in diplomacy today? And why does tech diplomacy matter now, at this particular moment in history?
The reason I think I was one of the early adopters of what is now called tech diplomacy was the coincidence that I was posted by my government in the case of my own personal background. I'm from Austria and I work for the Austrian Foreign Ministry to Silicon Valley in the year 2016, which was when our foreign ministry decided to open and establish an official presence in Silicon Valley. And what changed over the years while I was there was the position becoming, in addition to be obviously a commercial position, becoming more and more also a political position. And that had something to do with the global tech industries ascent to, I would say, global power, having a role in global international affairs, and the realization of nation states that it needed to, in some way, address that. And tech diplomacy, therefore, in some sense, mirrors the ascent of the global tech industry, that therefore the name tech diplomacy, and really became a practice rather than a theory, a practice by governments, first in Silicon Valley, and I think more and more in other places of innovation, as a practice of how to engage with the private sector and using traditional means of diplomacy to do that.
If we follow that idea, are we witnessing a structural transformation of the international system itself, where technology companies are no longer just stakeholders, but actual geopolitical actors? And what does that mean for how diplomacy is practiced today?
I think that first, the initiative came largely from a realization that governments were, needed to address concerns that were largely domestic concerns or that would come from their citizens. So I think that was at the beginning, but I think more and more what also came into place was that technology companies stumbled onto the international system as well. And it's not only digital companies, it's not only social media platforms, it is the entire, what we now call the tech stack, the different layers of technology, both hardware and software, that are transforming our world and therefore also our international system. And I think our players are new actors in the international system. The realization that came not only to governments, they also came to tech companies, and sometimes unwillingly, they were all of a sudden becoming actors and needed to therefore also develop capacity of how to navigate this new system. And then I think recently also, we might talk about that later, the international system by itself, I think not just because of technology, has been undergoing some quite profound changes where technology plays a role.
You've worked extensively between Europe and Silicon Valley. When we look at AI governance and digital regulation, we often hear about a transatlantic gap. But beyond regulation, do you think these differences reflect deeper divergences in values, in how societies understand innovation, risk, and control? And ultimately, does this fragmentation make global cooperation harder?
I think it does. There are obviously differences. Sometimes these differences are exaggerated, but there are some, I mean, very, evident differences. And I'll start with the obvious ones, which are not even a matter of opinion, but just facts. And one is that many of those new frontier technology companies, the big ones, are based in the United States and not in Europe.
There is increasing discussion about a potential rupture in the global order, a system under stress, fragmentation, and competing interests. From your perspective, what role are science and technology playing in this transformation? Are they simply accelerating change or actively reshaping the balance of power?
You know, the system is kind of under stress and under duress and has in some ways changed dramatically. Now, your question was, what about new technologies? In what way do they shape that change? I think that they obviously, since they are related to the massive, transformations of our economies, or not just related, but drive them, I think that they matter a lot. And I think the different layers of these new technologies, that I laid out before in terms of hardware, software, infrastructure, connections, and therefore, in some sense, I wouldn't say that they have created the rupture, but they are certainly a main protagonist in this new world order, are certainly looked at by governments around the world, and are therefore, I would say, a main protagonist.
Well, as a main protagonist in the evolving global landscape, do you think that, taking into account what we just said, do you think that we can still say that science is a shared global good? Do you think maybe we're moving from open science to more strategic science?
I think that science and science diplomacy, as far as I look at the history also of that, and I know we are talking here in an initiative that is based in this tradition of science diplomacy, was really a product of the 20th century. I think that science still has that potential. I still think that scientists as diplomats, I know I've seen them in action. I think that they can produce still this bridge effect. But it is also, I think, in addition to that, and maybe always has been, even during the Cold War, scientists obviously, particularly the ones that are pioneering, that are, more kind of groundbreaking, not only their theories, but particularly their applications in the real world. They are also, in some sense, assets of national security and of power, and therefore also have become factors in this kind of growing global competitions that is in some ways not, as in the past, only based on ideological differences, but on really national interests. So we have, I think, scientific cooperation. It still continues, but I think that governments do ask themselves, when they promote scientific corporations, they also ask themselves questions of national security, questions of competition, at the same time that they promote science as a great, potential for bettering human lives. So I think the argument for science diplomacy, the argument for science in this kind of universal globalist tradition still holds, but we need to ask ourselves additional questions.
If science is becoming more intertwined with power and geopolitics, what does that mean for scientists themselves? Do they now carry a broader responsibility? Not just to produce knowledge, but to engage with diplomacy, public trust, and societal stability?
I think that's more my a view or my field in diplomacy. I think they do need to have a grasp of international relations, And of course, it is also true that diplomats need to get better informed about how these new technologies work. You would be surprised as to the levels of ignorance that you will
Oh,
find in our profession as well. It's a fast changing technology, as you said, and that poses a challenge for governments in general, and that is also true for diplomats. So you need that kind of technological knowledge. You need to have a basic grasp also of scientific concepts, and those are not easy even for scientists, let alone government bureaucrats to understand quantum physics, and then but you do I mean not in all its kind of forms, but you need to understand not only how things work but what they actually mean for a government and for the international system. So we are all, I think, under the realization that we need to learn in order to manage this transformation process or disrupt or certain disruptions well. And that is true for scientists, technologists, and government officials.
You've been a strong advocate for digital humanism, basically placing human values at the center of technological development. But in a world increasingly shaped by competition, national interest, and technological race dynamics, how realistic is it to keep ethics and human rights at the core of technology governance?
I mean, I think it's a very good question, and you used the word realistic, and we live in a world that seems to favor realism rather than idealism, and therefore I do think humanism generally helps. I think it is a certain an important ingredient in all we do, and therefore also international relations. But we also do need to understand we're not the only ones on this planet.
You've also worked at the intersection of art, science, and diplomacy. In a world dominated by data and algorithms, what can art bring that science and policy alone cannot? And can it actually help us better anticipate the risks and implications of emerging technologies?
Yeah, well, I do need to clarify that I no
yeah.
longer work at
Oh, I
Gerasi. I
apologize.
last year I left the program after 3 years, and rejoined now the Austrian Foreign Ministry. So I'm again working as a diplomat and as a diplomat only. But I do cherish those years. I've always in my career worked at the intersection of diplomacy and art. And why do I think this is relevant for the discussions that we have? I think that artists sometimes have a very important view in that they are not, driven necessarily by the same intentions as all of the actors we mentioned before, government officials, technologists, or scientists, that they ask questions that seem sometimes, whimsical, or seem sometimes ironical, sometimes seem critical, sometimes don't really make a lot of sense, and then arrive at, outcomes and results that are beautiful and make you think and look at the same phenomenon in different ways. So I think particularly artists that look at new technologies, work with new technologies, don't see them necessarily only as a tool, but also see them in some ways as a new medium that poses questions, artistic questions, philosophical questions are something that we absolutely need.
Your own career reflects a highly interdisciplinary path. What would you say to young professionals today who feel the pressure to specialize but are also drawn to multiple fields?
My own career is maybe not even that exemplary, but I have met in my trajectory a lot of people that have very diverse passions, and I think that people that want to succeed, in life, they need to obviously, be good at the things they do and passionate about the things they do, but often inspiration, innovation, and even, creative ideas actually come from disciplines, fields that are, on the other spectrum of what you're good at and what you do. So I do think that an interdisciplinary approach is important for scientists, but I think even for scientists to go out of the strict field of science and to collaborate with artists. I've seen projects that are super interesting, that advance both then science and have that potential as well as art, is something that will be helpful in order to navigate and manage this new world. I have a 15-year-old son who is now, trying to make sense of this new world that he's growing into. And I do always try to make him aware of, not everything is about specialization and a lot, there might be things that he's passionate about and you should obviously invest in that. But there are also things that might not seem important at first, but can be helpful at a later point. And I do think, skills and skills with working with these new phenomena and these new technologies are super important, but generally to look beyond the boundaries of your own field and your own talents and passions is the kind of skill that we will need for future generations in order to manage this increasingly complex world.
One of the major challenges today is that scientific knowledge, unfortunately, often stays confined within expert circles. In your experience, what differentiates scientists who successfully influence policy and society from those who don't? And how can young scientists develop that ability without oversimplifying their work?
I think that's a super interesting question. I'm not a scientist myself, but I do understand the danger of for scientists to popularize their ideas and to simplify the ideas and enter into discussions that are not really based on the rules of the field. But on the other hand, I also think that this is there is a part of the scientific discourse, at least this is what I hear from scientists, that is in some sense based on jargon and is in some sense excluding the wider population from participation without real necessity. So I think scientists that are really good, they are actually able to communicate that. So and that can be trained, and it is a skill that can be acquired. And I think that we need scientists to have those kind of communication skills to be able to talk and to explain what they do, no matter what kind of field they're in, because all of this is highly relevant, and people want to have answers, they want to have explanations. So I think, yeah, communication skills are super important, but I even think for advancing science itself, I think that it is important to, have a big picture view to think of what that science means, whether it comes to the ethics of it, whether it comes to the international relevance for it, or whether it just simply comes to what does it actually mean for everybody, for our daily lives. So I do think communication skills are a necessary part of the toolkit of any kind of scientist. And I do think that scientists increasingly know that and practice that.
Beyond communication, what mindset do you think is essential today for scientists who want to have real impact at the intersection of science, policy, and global affairs?
I mean, you mentioned the word humanism before. I do, maybe that is a very classic characteristic of a humanist worldview. I think wherever that passion leads you, I think it's better for science. I think it's also better for leading a better life. And people nowadays are faced with so many constraints, with so much anxiety, that they often forget that the best advice is do follow your passion and it will lead you somewhere.
That's great advice because I do think that we kind of start our career and we create these plans for like 5 and 10 years ahead, and we forget our true passions, or sometimes we even forget to take advantage of opportunities as they come our way because they simply don't fit the plan we had in our minds.
I agree with that. I mean, it's not that I necessarily did everything correctly in my own career, but I do think following one's passions is ultimately um, going to lead to something. It might take longer, it might make lead to digressions, but ultimately you need to motivate yourself to lead a good life, and to inspire other people. It's hard to inspire other people if you're not passionate about what you're doing. So that's, I think, the best advice I could give, not just to young people, but to everybody who finds it hard, and we all find it hard to navigate and to orient ourselves and each other in this new world.
Looking ahead, what is the one shift in mindset that the next generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators must embrace if they want to meaningfully engage with the geopolitical implications of their work?
I think that there is this idea of technology being a tool, and being nothing else but a tool. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, and I think that is partially true, obviously, and we know examples where new technologies are, have this kind of dual use of being, either bettering something or making things a lot worse. But I do also think that new technologies really challenge ourselves, and in what it really means to be a human being, to really live. They challenge us and force us to ask fundamental philosophical questions about why we are here on this planet. And that creates a lot of anxieties, a lot of resistance to these new technologies, a lot of I don't want to have anything to do with that, among many people, at least in my network, in my among my friends. And the one thing I would like to just tell anybody that lives in this new world is take on that challenge, that these new technologies, it's actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to rethink old certainties. It's an opportunity to look not just at the mere advantages of these technologies, but of the advantages to question everything. I think that is actually a new opportunity. We should not, just have this kind of reflex of turning away from this new world and just hoping that the old world and its certainties return, but rather this is the world we live in, and asking questions about oneself is a good thing, and we should all embrace that.
And finally, where can people follow your work or learn more about tech diplomacy?
So, I mean, I am on the one hand in the Austrian Foreign Ministry. I also teach tech diplomacy at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna, which is, I think, maybe the oldest still existing educational institution in the world, in Vienna. So I do engage in education, and I think there are a lot of different ways to learn about tech diplomacy, or you don't need to even call it tech diplomacy, of ways of how new technologies are shaping our world. I think this is something a very positive thing about the about our new world, is that there is a lot of information available uh, on some of these tech platforms, even. So I think this is not some sort of secretive, exclusive content that is hidden away. I think that tech diplomacy is a very open practice that a lot of actors and players talk about. And I would encourage everybody to just include that in your thinking. New technologies do not only change your life, but they also change the world and the international order that we're living in. And just keep that in your mind when you next time, get yourself informed about whatever you want to inform yourself.
Thank you, Martin, for this insightful conversation.
Thank you, Ers. It was a true pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for joining the Global Network for Science and Diplomacy podcast.